Hey everyone, welcome to Youth Bombs. I'm Craig.
I'm Holden.
I'm Carson.
And we're the voice of young conservatives in Alachua County. A lot of changes to the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, since we last spoke about it on the show, such as USAID cuts to federally funded internships, and more. Carson, what can you tell us about what's been going on since we last covered it?
Yeah, so there was... I think the first thing that happened of all of those was they completely froze USAID. And then recently, there's been issues with funding generally on college campuses, but especially with internships, because a lot of internship programs are actually like either they get a tax write-off or more commonly, they just get direct federal subsidization of part of the program, which kind of incentivizes these companies to actually provide the programs because these internships often pay well and they provide a really valuable experience for college students. And then there's plenty of other things. I mean, obviously there was the email that got sent out to federal workers that told them that they had to respond with what they've done. There's been we talked about the buyout program a couple weeks back, but yeah, so they've been very, very active, and I don't know, it's kind of extra legislative, but I guess we'll get into that.
Okay. And Holden, let's look at USAID, for instance. Are those cuts, is the freeze to the agency a net good?
Yes.
And why?
I mean, obviously it's a very small portion of the budget, but I mean, it's not the role of the state to do that. So, giving aid to foreign countries or nonprofit organizations, which it does, it's not, you're taking capital from entrepreneurs, and that's not how, coercively. So no, I think it should be abolished.
Agree. Carson, are we in consensus on this?
No,
Okay.
not at all. Well, actually, yes, partially. So I do agree that USAID as an institution and like general foreign aid is a bad idea, and I agree that it should be phased out. The issue is a direct freeze. I'm certain you guys don't know all of the things that USAID funds, because if you did, you would realize that a direct freeze it's horrendous. I mean, number one, there are a lot of these are actually materials that we've already paid for that just have to be shipped out. So it's not even a direct, like, we're stopping funding for this. It is, we are going to stop doing everything that we have done, number one. And number two, a lot of third world countries, developing countries, actually, the United States pays for instance, medications for, kids with tuberculosis in Africa. So not only is this medication that's already paid for, but it's also medication that just got frozen that people are going to die from. So what should happen, theoretically, is if we're going to make these cuts, it should be done on a gradual scale, it should be paced properly, and these people should be notified that actually your program is going to be completely cut. We should, try to get some sort of private entity to come in and say, we will do this for this, supposed price. So that way, it's just there's not going to be any gaps, We're not going to we'll fill in the gaps with the private sector, and the public sector cannot immediately get cut. That is, I'm sure you can understand why, especially in the case of like a kid getting medicine for tuberculosis, that could be a disaster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on that particular issue, I would agree. It's not the job of the state to be giving foreign countries medicine to cure these diseases. That should be charity and private institutions. However, I also agree that, yes, it should be, in that particular instance, phased out so that something can replace it, especially if it is the case that the medicine was already paid for. I don't want American taxpayer dollars going towards that, but we have to do it in a manner that is sustainable and works for all parties involved, particularly the U.S. So if we've already paid for the medicine, then hey, we don't need it. Let's distribute it to the kids. And then there are no shortages of charities that can fill in the gap. But otherwise, I think a lot of waste going on at USAID, and you could axe most of, because a lot of it is not related to life saving.
I heard that there was like a transgender opera they were paying for in Dublin. So it's like, that is, I'm sure we can all agree that's absurd. I don't think anyone's saying otherwise. I don't even think the, most Democrats would disagree. Maybe you'll find a few fringe ones. But yeah, I think overall, there's obviously some waste. Government has waste. I do think that the amount of the waste in the program is being overstated, but it doesn't matter. That is something so like minuscule to this overall issue. I agree. USAID should be phased out. It should not just be immediately frozen and gutted. Like that is bad, but it should be phased out 100%. But yeah, and obviously there's more to it. And like Holden said, USAID is a drop in the bucket of our aid. Like,
Yeah.
if we're being honest, if I'd rather spend $3 billion to a year, or I think it's a year to Israel, which was a part of our budget even before the October 7th attacks, or I can use that $3 billion to pay for kids in Africa to get medicine, when Israel already has a social safety net, already has universal health care for their people, and that kind of thing. Yes, I would 100% send it to the kids in Africa who are getting their tuberculosis medicine. So it's not my top priority, but it is, I do understand wanting that to be done through the private sector.
And speaking of things being temporary and phased out versus completely stopped, what can you tell us about these federally funded internships that have come to a halt?
Yeah. So I believe not everything was completely frozen. It was actually frozen for 2 days, and then it got unfrozen for a lot of things. The one thing I will say is we have to look at a kind of value per dollar assessment for each of these programs. So, for instance, USAID, actually someone made this argument at the Charlie Kirk event, that it kind of helps the U.S. keep its global dominance. So if we're comparing that and comparing the lengths that a couple of $1 million can go in establishing U.S. dominance in foreign policy matters and across the world, then yes, I think that the value per dollar there is great. And the same thing I think applies for a lot of these internships, particularly the ones in the STEM fields. A lot of these are for jobs that aren't necessarily super valuable to corporations. Like, for instance, cybersecurity is a big one. The types of cybersecurity individual professionals that we need, and we realistically should try to prop up through these internship programs, are the types that would then go into our military. And we need a strong military, clearly. I mean, there's a lot of adversarial relationships going on right now that are coming to their peaks, it seems like, in the near future. So yeah, I certainly think there is use in a lot of these internships. There's another one that particularly looks at tracking data for hurricanes to see what areas are going to be the most prone to flooding. That is another internship program. And so these individuals are very, I think these are important jobs. And the kicker is, compared to a lot of the other things that we spend money on in this country, it's a drop in the bucket. Again, it is not a huge amount. I believe we cut something like $1 billion in cybersecurity funding. I would absolutely be fine with spending $1 billion, obviously in context of our national budget, if it means that we are going to get, even 10% better cybersecurity employees in the near future, and they're going to get this valuable experience and before they come work for our military. I think that is a worthwhile investment that we can make compared to something like our entitlement programs or our welfare programs. But I digress.
Gotcha. And Holden, how do you feel about these programs? Do you see, for instance, with the hurricanes, right?
Yeah.
That may not be profitable for a business to do. So aren't there occasions where perhaps it is to the benefit of the people?
No.
Okay.
So I'm sorry. There's an opportunity cost to all that money, and that's the reality. Yes, it's great. Yes, so we get funding for this, but there are meteorologists and there are people who study the weather that have a vested interest in reporting the weather because people value knowing what's going to happen with the weather, and they pay for it, or they watch free shows that run ads and they make their money that way. So because people value it, because people are willing to see what's going on with the weather, they're going to make money from it. So, and same with cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a huge growing market right now, big growing market. And there's the high price of the labor it justifies spending a lot of money on the education necessary to work that job. But I mean, we could argue about this all day. Carson made a great point. We need to, if DOGE was serious, they would be cutting Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other entitlement programs. That's the reality. They're not serious. Let's just stop this nonsense. We could debate about this crap all day. It's $1 billion. That's nothing. We spend over $7 trillion a year. That's the reality. So if we're not willing to touch the major line items, then we could joke about what was it? The
transgender opera.
We could joke about the transgender opera. We could joke about the $50 million of Gaza condoms or whatever it was. We could joke about that crap all day, but it's not doing anything to the federal budget. It's literally an accounting error. And so we have to cut the major line items.
I see what you mean, and I think in regards to the entitlement, really, DOGE, nothing they can do in terms of that, given that that has to go through Congress,
right?
And they're not going to play ball regardless of whether or not there is validity or not to making adjustments to those 3 programs. So that's the problem. I think it's a question of they're starting with what they can, though. Could the approach be different? Perhaps, yes, in some areas. Is there room to change things like we discussed with tuberculosis? I think so. But otherwise, you do what you can, and I think that's what they're able to do.
I think, Craig, the way that Trump has been able to assert his influence over the Republican Party and specifically, congressmen in the Republican Party has been quite impressive. That is the one thing I will give him, is he has kind of been able to get the entire party to bend to his whims, positive or negative, in almost every instance. So if Trump wanted to, I think there is no argument that with Mike Johnson behind him too, he could say, we are going to pass this or you are going to get primaried. He has Elon Musk funding him. I'm sure this is something that, as many differences as I've had with Elon Musk recently, Elon Musk could get behind. So it is really just about the will of the Republican Party to do it. It is not, and it might not be electorally the best thing, but it is entirely about, they control the Congress. They control these people's basically funding for re-election campaigns. You say, you do this, or you're getting primaried, or you do this, or we will let the Democrat take your seat. That is what it should be. Because these are, realistically, these are the values that the Republican Party needs to hold if we are talking about a real conservative party in this country. And sadly, I don't think the Republican Party represents that. I don't think the Republican Party is serious about conserving our future, which is what we're doing by eliminating our deficit. So I think overall, DOGE is not serious, like Holden said, because if they were, they would be going after these programs. And frankly, all you have to go after is military and entitlements. Going after these, very, very small amounts of waste is not really super beneficial. It actually wastes our time. And more importantly, it's not going to give us what we're going to talk about next, which is a $5,000 stimulus package for every American. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
But
yeah, no, fair points there, and I see what you mean. I think that even though Trump, with his massive leverage over the party, still, at the end of the day, these politicians, because there's such narrow margins in the House and Senate, that there are some who will play ball if Trump wanted to cut those 3 entitlements, and there's going to be a holdout who'll say, even if you primary, even if you let the Democrat, run roughshod over me and don't help me with funding, I am going to do this because I think it will show that I'm an independent voice and will gain me popularity in my district because Social Security is popular, because Medicare is popular, because Medicaid's popular. So yeah, I think even with all that pressure, you probably couldn't even get 200 members of the House to do it.
And that's why you need to go for a gradual shrinking of the program, not only because I think that it is the right thing to do when you have promised so many people these amounts of money, but I also think it is the electorally better way to go about it. Cutting Social Security gradually and saying we're not going to pay people after this point, or we are not going to pay people above this income, or whatever you want to do with that. But I think that is what you have to do. Sadly, as much as I would love to see the program completely gutted, I don't think you can do that. I think you have to do it in small waves. And so I do think if you can't, and frankly, this should be a deal breaker. In a serious Republican Party, this would be a deal breaker, is if we are not going to fund the government if you cannot get behind with some cuts, even on the margins of Social Security. Because cuts on the margins of Social Security would be tenfold what we're saving by cutting cybersecurity programs. I mean, it would be maybe even
more than
50-fold. So anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Trump voted to increase the debt ceiling, right? Is that right?
I believe he wanted us to.
Or he wanted us to?
I believe so, yes. And there were In terms of the House proposed package, so it would increase the debt ceiling, but it would also cut spending. So
Okay. So if you don't raise the debt ceiling, if it's true that, so if you don't raise the debt ceiling, then the government has to cut something, because if not, then they have to default, right? So they have to cut something, and that's the way you do it right there. The buck stops with me. No more. That's it. We're done. So we have to cut something, and now Congress is forced to, in the House is forced to, to work with you. This is like generally how you do negotiations, or at least from what I've read, is you start with a really high asking price and then you work down from it. Because if you start with a really high asking price, then the comparison in people's mind is much, it doesn't seem as your extreme. When they're comparing it to the extreme, then your offers seem better. So anyway, or more in your favor. I explained that bad, but
it's the opposite of the foot in the door thing.
Yeah.
Like you want to, instead of getting in with a small offer and working your way up to a big one, you want to start with a big offer and work their way down to a small one.
Yeah. So like with Social Security, you could say we're going to cut it all. Like, right, or some, maybe it's not that extreme, but you figure out something that's a pretty extreme thing, even by most people, by some people's standards. Not by, I would say mine, but not mine. So like by most people's standards, something pretty extreme, and then you could say, all right, you could work down to something like people now could choose whether or not they want to participate in Social Security, like younger people, and now we're going to start reforming it to where only people with a certain net worth could receive the benefits, or something like that, right? Like work down to something that's going to actually get passed. Because at the end of the day, I'm sorry, the Republicans are not criticizing Trump, right? By and large, of course there are going to be some, but whatever Trump does, they're mostly with it. So Trump, he doesn't need to get reelected. This is his last time. So go for it. Right now is the perfect time. The only other time in Social Security's history it's been like this is 2005 and 2006, I believe. So you have to do it now. Do it right now. Cut the programs. But he doesn't want to do it. It's unfortunately Trump believes in the welfare state. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think you're not going to like. It's a combination of factors. I'm not going to say it is just because he's a coward, because I understand the importance that Social Security plays, especially in igniting the Republicans' older base. But I think you have to do something. It is your responsibility as the president of the United States to say, we have to do something about this. We are running out of time to address this issue.
Mm-hmm. And looking further at budget and debt, you mentioned the $5,000 stimulus from the DOGE cuts. That's something I'll say right off the bat I disagree with, because we're so far in debt, 36 trillion, that we can't afford it. And even if it's 20%, let's say, of the DOGE cuts, it's still something where we're so far in debt, there's much work to do on the deficit that we can't afford it right now. If we were in a surplus and had no debt and things were riding smooth, then maybe we can do a tax cut. But otherwise, I don't think we can afford that this time. Do we agree?
Yeah, and wouldn't that also cause like a major inflationary spiral if you gave everyone that money immediately?
Well, it wouldn't be
more, right?
It wouldn't be. The Fed isn't printing right now. I don't want to make this really long, but okay. So essentially, what would happen is, if let's say the budget deficit was cut, or let's say spending was cut $500 trillion, that cut $500 trillion out of the deficit, or $500 billion out of the deficit. It would just be like the government spent less money, basically. It wouldn't cause inflation, really. Inflation is a monetary phenomena, right? So it'd just be like, instead of the government spending money, you have people spending money, is the short answer. But I could explain why it's not inflationary if it's just long.
Gotcha. And that's all the time we've got for today. Thanks everyone so much for watching. We really appreciate it. We upload 3 times a week. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.